What's up, everybody? It's Mason here with Comics and Crosses, where we discuss the eternal truths behind our modern mythology. I hope you all are doing well, and today I got a special video where I'm going to be talking about stories. This is very fundamental. Story structure, why it is that we gravitate towards stories, what they tell us about life itself, and how it's rooted in Christian teaching and tradition. Okay, everybody, so I actually graduated with a degree in radio, television, and film. So I studied creative writing, I studied screenwriting, and my favorite was definitely screenwriting. I've always loved movies. Ever since I was a kid, I can just remember sitting there for hours and hours and watching movies over and over again. I just get sucked into them. I just get drawn in. I think I've always had an active imagination. And if you're into comic books, then probably you as well. Same thing with comics. You know, as I found comics, it was like, wow, this is a whole world imagined, and people keep expanding upon it. You know, the story keeps growing and going even further. And so if you're a fan of superheroes, of comic books, of movies even, of larger-than-life stories and characters, I wanted to today try to talk about where that comes from, at least from my perspective, from what I know, and why it is that we might all gravitate towards these things. I mean, this is kind of like a foundational idea in why I even do these videos and this channel and this whole thing, Comics and Crosses. So some of you may know, or you may not know, that there is something called a 3-act story structure. Now, this is what all major mainstream blockbuster movies would be based upon. And 3-act in that there's a beginning, middle, and an end. It gets more detailed than that, but I'm just giving you an overview. So when we go see a movie, basically in any movie, the first 15 minutes or so, depending on how long it is, if it's not like a Lord of the Rings type deal, is going to establish a world. You know, maybe we're meeting, the characters from Onward, and seeing this whole world of fantasy and where people are elves and different things like that. Maybe it's Star Wars where we're meeting Luke Skywalker and seeing him as a young man working on a moisture farm in the desert, seemingly nothing exciting going for him. Basically we meet our main characters and we see an established sense of what the world is. Okay? Now, this is called the first act, and there's always something that happens. If you've ever noticed in a movie, there's something called an inciting incident at the end of the first act. And this is something that happens that comes in and disrupts the status quo that we've just seen. Maybe aliens arrive, Independence Day, there's these giant spaceships that come and hover over major cities, or there's, Star Wars, the Empire comes and spoiler alert from 1977, but kills Luke's adoptive parents' aunt and uncle. So there's these things that happen that kind of set things into motion. That's called the inciting incident, and from there on, the bulk of the movie you get is what you call the second act. And this is usually a hero's journey. This is something like Luke Skywalker going into space and trying to make a difference. And there's usually a point about halfway where it seems that our hero goes from just kind of coming along on a journey and not being totally sure to really taking personal responsibility of this journey and this battle that is challenging them and forcing them to grow, because they're trying to they're coming in conflict with whatever this inciting incident was that disrupted their world. The hot boy at high school decides that he's gonna pretend to like the nerdy girl, and then they are dating together, and then he starts to fall for her, and we all know where this story is going. And then there's something called the end of the second act, where all hope is lost. And so this is where the girl finds out that the boy is only dating her because of a bet. And, this is where all the other spaceships are destroyed, and it's down to only Luke to defeat the Empire. Or this is where somebody betrays the team, and now they've lost what seems like their only hope of overcoming and defeating. And we all know this part in the movie where it's getting to the end of the movie, but it's right before the big confrontation and the big climax of the third act that will determine whether our hero or our heroes overcome this thing that is pressing against them, this conflict that is forcing them to grow and push themselves. So, I think, hopefully you're tracking with me and you know what I'm talking about. Anybody who's seen a movie or read a good story, this is kind of your basic 3-act structure that you see in storytelling. And so you see it all the time in comics and in movies and things like that. More so in movies, because comics have the liberty of being able to go on further and extend their storylines. But the reason I bring this up is because this 3-act structure, this way of storytelling that we know so easily, that we can identify, that as we start to watch movies and things as kids, we start to pick up on and understand. And I think all of us kind of know to root for that character and have that hope inside of us, unless it's a movie with a surprise ending or something unique like No Country for Old Men that just throws you off to throw you off and subvert your expectations or make a point or whatever it is. This is something that we get, So the reason I bring all this up is because in my channel I talk about these eternal ideas, these bigger concepts that are rooted inside of people that I believe have to do with their relationship to their Creator, that can be derived from Christian thinking and Holy Scriptures and things like that. So if you look at the story of the Bible is basically that there was a status quo, that God created humanity, and that He intended to have perfect relationship with human beings. Meaning human beings were not sick, we're not dying, we're not killing each other, we're not doing awful things that we see nowadays. This is kind of like, I think, what we all want. And in fact, one of my favorite verses is from the book of Ecclesiastes 3:11, which mentions that God has written eternity into the hearts of men. And so what that means is that there's a longing in every human soul for things to be resolved. So stories kind of speak to the greater feelings and the greater expectations and the greater outlook that we have for this story called life. That ultimately that there was a status quo, that we know that it's not that way anymore, that way because of sin entering the world, the whole idea of Adam and Eve. Most people, Christian or not, are familiar with that story. But the idea that man thought he knew better, that man and woman thought they knew better, they disobeyed God, and thereby created a rift and a separation to where now people's own personal desires and ideas and motivations of an impure nature or a separate from God nature can infiltrate the world and make it a worse place, whereas God's original intention in creating man and woman, creating humankind, was that there would be perfect harmony, that it would be a fruitful, prosperous experience in communion with the living God, with the Creator. That sounds like heaven. That sounds like what people want, where the earth is not abused, where human beings are not abused, where people don't abuse people in order to get money, but rather they serve one another in perfect harmony. So whether you're Christian or not, everybody's hoping and believing for that in their heart of hearts, I would say. Unless they're completely psycho and, they dream of killing people in their sleep and they're a serial killer, something like that. But I think most people would agree that sounds like the first thing I described sounds like a good idea for the future. So, obviously, Jesus came into creation as a story of Christianity, God came in human flesh, and was his conflict that he had to face, believe it or not, was he had to live a full life as a human and go through all the normal struggles. And on top of that, the type of human he was an ancient Jewish human, which meant that he had to bear the load of probably the most stringent religious tradition on the planet at that time. And so they had a law, an extended law of something 600 plus, I believe, laws and things written into their code of religious practices. And so he bore each one of those, meaning he carried them out in order to be both perfect in their own system and perfect in God's system at the same time, thereby breaking and superseding their system. So the moment at the end of the second act for Jesus when all looked dark would have been when he was crucified on the cross. And even his own believers thought, well, I guess this is the end of the ride. His own disciples were like, well, we thought he was the one. We thought he was going to save us all, but I guess we were wrong. And so it was the darkest point, that point in the movie where the heroes want to give up, or they separate and go their separate ways, where it doesn't look like the goal is going to be accomplished. And yet, Jesus, obviously, in Christianity, the holiday of Easter is celebrating the resurrection of Christ, where he came back from the dead, defeating death, and ultimately delivering humanity and creating a way for people to again be reconciled to God, their creator, through him. So, like we see in a movie, like we see in that 3-act, there is the established world. The world is upset by an inciting incident, sin entering, the empire entering, any sort of bad thing that the people messing with the Shire, whatever it happens to be. And then there is conflict, and there's a moment where things seem darker than ever and hopeless. All hope is lost, and then there is ultimately confrontation, victory. So maybe and hopefully I may have just made you a little bit like me, where you can never watch a movie the same way or listen to or read a story the same way, but help but see that the reason we all understand and know that things flow this way is because the patterns and the story of creation itself, and that is what Christian teaching shows. And that's the story of Jesus, and that's something that when we see it in stories, it resonates with us. Thank you guys for your time. Thank you for checking out this video, hanging with me. I hope that you found it informative and life-giving, and I hope that you can look at stories a whole different way, especially movies, and have a little sense of the great story that we're in. So much love and peace, people. Be sure to like, subscribe to the video if you can, and I will check you next time.